Super. Thanks everybody for joining on short notice like this. I really appreciate it. I can share an agenda, and Kristen, I'll turn to you if there's anything you want to say as we get going, but this is what we have for our short agenda right now. Kristen, anything on your side you'd like to say as we get going?
No, happy to just jump right in. Does seem like a short agenda, so maybe that's
Great.
maybe that will lead to an efficient meeting. We'll see.
We'll see. We'll see. All right. As always, thanks everybody else for joining us. This is a meeting of the steering committee of the Vermont Climate Council. We've got 3 members here, which allows us to have a quorum to get going. And thanks everyone else who's listening in. So yeah, this is our agenda. The main goal here are these 2 things right here, right? We need to make sure we're all comfortable with the agenda that's planned for the council meeting next week. And then there's some pending subcommittee assignments that really need to happen. They've been a little, so if we can move on these quickly today, that'd be great. So this is what we're trying to do. We will make some space for public comment before we adjourn. Before we jump in, steering committee members, anything else that we should spend our time on in this meeting today? Billy, your audio is on. Sorry. All good? Okay. So why don't we jump in? We can approve the minutes as well from our last meeting. All these are clickable on the agenda for, I think, Jane, you dropped in the chat or somebody jumped. Yeah. Does anybody need a little time to just look through those before we move to approve them? Okay. Any concerns about the minutes from last meeting? I'm seeing none. All right. Let's treat those as approved. All right. So let's talk about this. I'm going to keep sharing my screen for now. And I just click through to the draft agenda. This is something that is based on our previous conversations, and Jane and I put together. The essence of it is this is at most a 2-hour meeting. And the real meat of this meeting is ensuring we have the new composition of the steering committee approved by the council. As you all know from the last conversation, there actually isn't much decision making because there's 2 folks who raised their hand from the Senate appointees and 2 folks who raised their hand from the House appointees, and that's what we need. So unless something happens in real time with the council, it's essentially saying, yep, that looks good, right? But we need to create that space and get folks to confirm that. And if there's any last minute thing that needs to happen, we'll address it in real time. So that's one important reason to get together. The other important reason is just to let everybody know what's happening on the biomass recommendations and the plan that you all came up with in your last meeting. And just update folks, we are supposed to have a meeting tomorrow morning of those counselors. There's a little bit of a hiccup in it that we're struggling with representation from the Ag and Ecosystem Subcommittee. We can talk about that in a second if folks want to. And then the third thing to do is, it's been a while since, or ever, since the council had an idea what's happening at the Climate Action Office and what the Climate Action Office is doing relates to the priorities of the council and implementation of the initial climate action plan. And so we thought it'd be worth a half hour to do that, right? Do a 15-minute presentation from Jane and then some conversation about that. That's all that we had imagined for this meeting, right? Those 3 things, plus a just transition moment, which we're trying to sort out. And Kelly, I'll talk to you maybe afterwards about an idea I have. But let me just pause and say, how does this look for the agenda of the council? Does it match what you were thinking when we talked about this last time? Any friendly amendments, questions, etc.? Liz?
Two things. I think it looks good. Will the Climate Action Office update include, to the extent relevant, I guess, any of the post-session actions that might be necessary because of legislation that was put through or not? That's question one. So I'll pause there.
I'll let Jane answer that.
I guess if you're referring in particular to S5, and I can ask more broadly, you know, ANR has limited responsibilities with respect to S5. We'll serve on the technical advisory group, and then of course are obligated now to do a life cycle analysis of energy use on an annual basis. But we don't. I think there could be a broader legislative update on that would be more comprehensive than just what is relevant to the Climate Action Office.
Climate Office, yeah,
So,
okay.
yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if there's time at this meeting or not, but it usually is post-session worth doing something like that, just so folks who don't have to be involved every day know where things landed and what pieces were passed that might affect the work here. So that's just a suggestion. And my other question is totally ministerial. I see in the minutes that we just went through, and I recall saying that I'd be happy to help on biomass to the extent needed. I presume you have good representation, and because I don't have that meeting tomorrow on my calendar, which is fine. I just want to make sure that's not a hiccup on my end.
Yeah, that's a thing on which email it went to. It went to your partner email. And so it may be
Great.
just make it into your calendar.
Oops.
So I can CC other emails if you want, Liz. So I'll make sure it gets in your calendar. Kristen.
Thanks. Jane, I just wonder, jumping off of Liz's comment, maybe I have approved the biomass task group recommendation. So maybe we just get those out there so folks know who's on it, just to make sure in the event there are other hiccups, everyone knows where they're assigned and
Yes,
where they should be.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's just so the list that built off what was discussed in this group last time, and let me just pull that up, and Jane, maybe if you have it even handier than I do, because what we tried to do is get representation for each of the subcommittees was kind of the
You can put it in the chat, David, so people have it visually.
Yeah, can you do that? Okay, super. And one of the things about that is while Abby Kors from Ag and Eco initially said yes, she actually isn't able to be part of it. And so it raises a question on one of the more important topical subcommittees, how we get that representation. If you want, Jane, I can drop the whole thing. I have all 5 of them. And
I just hit return by accident as I was going through putting them in.
Okay.
But if you want to drop that, go ahead.
So yeah, it's Abby, it's Julie Moore, it's Liz Miller, it's Bram, and Kelly Klein. And again, the intent of having a smaller group is not to be exclusionary. It's twofold. It's one, not to have a quorum of counselors, and also to have representation across those different substantive areas that are relevant in the substantive areas that were involved in the biomass task group as well. So that's the intent. And so if folks, other counselors want to be part of this or listen into it, that's fine too. I think we just want to be cautious about not tripping up quorum and things like that in a small group. Particularly as we just had these initial, an initial call to figure out which end is up. Kristen, was there other things you want to say about that?
Oh, sorry, I didn't, I just didn't lower my hand.
It's okay.
I do, although, since my hand's still up, I do have a question on the steering committee composition. I know that we have the folks listed from the House appointees and the Senate appointees, but I didn't know if we're talking the entire composition, if we should also, Jane, include the administrative appointees as well, and then I can provide those to you, and then we can have a oh, they're in there. Okay.
So we put them in the top of this document because our understanding is, the administration, you all aren't going to make a change to that as far as we know.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I'm locked in because of the legislation.
Right.
But Julie will remain. She has volunteered, and we were happy that she did so. So she'll remain on as well. So that's fine. I just didn't know if we should include the self nominations in the same way as we have, I guess, but for me, in the same way we've done the Senate and House appointees.
I'm open to however folks feel it's best to present. It felt like this was very much a decision from the administration of how the administration wants to do this.
Yeah, that's fine. As long as I just wanted to make sure it's noted, and I missed that, so I appreciate the highlight.
Super. Okay, great. Liz.
Yeah, and the only other question I had, picking up from our last meeting, we had at the time not had suggested committee assignments for the new members. And I know Paula had indicated an interest in steering committee, which is great. But part of the reason she noted that was because she hadn't been assigned to a committee. So I guess the question is, are we, Jane, have you done any circling back just to make sure everyone's still willing to serve? Mostly because I said that I'd be happy to if no one else wanted to. So I just wanted to make sure we were good for next week.
I have not had personal conversations with folks after this was put forward, but that and can try to do so if needed.
Yeah, I just did. So I guess I'm jumping to our next one, but do they know, does Paula or David or anyone else who's unassigned, I think there was at least one or two other people who are unassigned, maybe Peter Sterling. Do they know where that's headed or not yet?
Yeah, but yes. So when we get to the subcommittee assignments, I have corresponded with them this week about.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Yeah. Good. And let's jump to that in 1 second. Before we do, if we stick with the agenda, what I heard Liz you say is maybe a good time to do a quick legislative update, right? And maybe Jane or somebody else could do that, just as a quick highlight of these are the pieces of legislation that are relevant for the initial climate action plan and the council's work. I heard you say that, so maybe that could be included in this block of time around climate action office updates.
I would encourage that to be separate. It's
separate?
It's not part of the climate action office. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I took them to mean just in that time area, but yeah, I agree with Jane. It can be separate. I just wondered if that's where we were thinking of covering it. I'm also totally fine if folks don't want to do it this time. It's just feels like a natural at some point.
Is it over? Is it all done?
S5 is.
S5 is done. Okay.
5 is.
But the rest of it is not.
Right.
So I just wonder if, I mean, folks can chime in if they disagree. I think the PUC is probably the best entity to give an update on the S5 work, in that that's the entity that is charged with the most work in that area, most relevant entity. I don't know if it makes sense, just given the breadth of that, I'm not sure it makes sense to try and slot it in here. Maybe it does, though, if the PUC is, if someone from the PUC is kind of willing to jump in and just give a high level overview. I know they have some advertisements out for employees that they are hiring in furtherance of that work and legislation. I'm not sure what other I'm not sure what other updates they would have, but they could certainly give an overview of the legislation, I would imagine. I just don't know if we can pull them in this amount of time, but happy to try to if that's helpful.
Let's do a quick amongst you all. Like, does this seem like a good use of time for Monday? Should we wait till the next council meeting, which will probably be in September? Jane, then Liz, Lauren, welcome your thoughts.
One suggestion is that after past legislative sessions the last 2 years, Julie and I have worked to just have a table of relevant legislative actions and where they stood. So beyond S5, there's H126, the conservation bill, there's the housing bill, there are other things that have direct ties to the climate action plan, and that made it through legislative session one way or another this year. And so maybe not the detailed deep dive into S5 and how that's progressing, because I agree with you, Secretary Clauser, that that's best handled by the PUC or others, and that won't be initiated till later this summer, really. And so maybe just an acknowledgement of legislation that made it through the session with ties to the cap.
Completely agree. That's what I had in mind. And like that very quick summary, no more than 10 minutes sort of thing. And funding, I would put in there too, Jane, just because folks will want to know there was a good bit of funding, transportation, EV related, some climate related, that also could be mentioned. So anyway.
That might be harder
to
pull together with the
budget. True. Right.
That's
might have
the
to
piece.
put pending.
That piece is a bit pending. So we
fair.
I wonder if maybe we do some kind of high level. This is what there are some things, to Jane's point, that have passed, and then do kind of a legislative recap, maybe at a different meeting. Maybe there's one meeting over the summer, or maybe that's part of our first meeting in the fall, where hopefully we have news by the fall.
Right. So let me understand real quick though, doing a short table, is this the right time to do that? Should we pull that off on Monday? Or should we just push the whole thing to September?
Yeah, we're still missing 15 bills. And some will not be, some that we have won't be issued necessary. There will be no action by Tuesday. So I don't know, it might be a little premature, but we could certainly do what we could do what we have and what we expect is coming pending further action.
Okay. Jane, last word on this, and then let's move on to the next thing.
Yeah, I guess I would just echo Secretary Clauser. I wouldn't mind. I would be capable of putting together the chart on brief legislative overview, but the funding feels like a bigger ask. And it is something that you'll start to, when we talk about the Climate Action Office updates, one of our responsibilities that we see with us is to communicate climate spending across state government and think about how we do that for fiscal year 24 and then beyond. And we have an interagency advisory board to the Climate Action Office that met yesterday. And actually that was a topic of discussion about how we were going to assimilate the funding from fiscal year 24 and what that criteria and what we count and don't count. And that's something that we're planning to pull together a draft for September. And so I think a spending conversation about what's in the fiscal year 24 budget for climate should come later if possible, but happy to work with Secretary Moore to pull together a quick snapshot of legislation that has passed or not passed.
Sound good, everybody? Okay, let's do that. One quick thing, like I said, we actually don't have this just transition reflection nailed down. We had one idea that's looking like it might not work. So if anybody has an idea about something powerful or interesting to do at the top of the meeting, maybe shoot me a note or Jane a note afterwards. We're hunting for good ideas. So feel free to shout it out if you have one now, but in the interest of time, just shoot me an email as well if folks have that. Okay. Otherwise, sound good? Anything else to say about this? Okay, great. That gets us to this one, the subcommittee assignments, and we already flicked at it. There's two ways. Jane, you're going to walk us through this table, and then do you have, what is this link to? Great. Okay. Jane, how can I be most helpful for you to explain the communication you've had with our three new counselors?
So the subcommittee assignments was just for background for steering committee members to see which subcommittees are really missing counselors the most at this point. So just want to reflect that between rural resilience and adaptation and just transitions, there are really no counselors right now on rural resilience and adaptation and just transitions. I have a email that I got yesterday from Sue Minter that I haven't shared with the rest of the council yet, but it's written on behalf of for all of you to receive, that Sue resigned from the council this week, effective immediately. So we also are, so Sue is no longer with us on the Climate Council. And so the Just Transition Subcommittee really only has, it has Kelly as well as having Abby Willard in place of Secretary Tebbett. But those two subcommittees are by far the most short right now with the counselors. So just I highlighted that in my email when I communicated with counselors Peter Sterling, David Dean, and Paula Moulton, and asked them to put forward to consider that in their primary representation of what subcommittees they would like to sit on, and then really asked them to consider where their seats make the most sense with respect to the expertise they're supposed to be bringing to the council. So what you'll see here is the seat that those counselors occupy, their first, second, and third choice for subcommittee appointments. And as you all know, it's been delegated now to the steering committee to actually make the appointment. So it's in your hands now to assign them.
Right. And so just to reiterate, Jane, the subcommittees right now that are most shy of counselors being part of them are Just Transitions, Rural Resilience, and Ag and Ecosystems, right? Those are the three that are most in need of counselor support.
No, I would, well, Ag and Eco and Science and Data have the same number.
Oh, okay.
And cross-sector is very
full.
well represented. Yeah.
Okay. So steering committee members, you have the not particularly great task of saying, where can we help new counselors do the most good? So Liz, do you have some thoughts on this?
I have two questions. One is, we have a couple of counselors, I'm thinking of Jared in particular, and then there might be one or two others that are on more than one subcommittee. Do we know whether any of these three are interested in something similar? And then the follow-on question is, I think I recall we at least asked counselors at the prior meeting to indicate if they had any issues with their current assignment. I'm just wondering if, just making sure that I'm right about that.
That's a great question. I don't have answers to those. Maybe Jane, do you have answers to those two questions?
I'm really sorry, but my chat pinged and I missed the second comment Liz made.
The second comment was just, I guess I'm looking like Kelly, for example, looks like she's, liaison on one and chair of another. Jared is chair of one on the other. There's probably a couple other examples I'm not quickly seeing. So do we know whether any of these three would prefer or seek more than one subcommittee? And then follow-on question, do we know, am I right that we at least raise the issue of, if you're not happy with your current assignment, make sure you tell us, just as we think about these assignments, the current people who sit on them, of counselors in particular.
So I didn't ask about multiple subcommittees. I do know one detail is that Kelly has signaled that by stepping onto the steering committee, she does not want to represent Just Transitions on cross-sector anymore from a capacity standpoint. So that's not reflected on the updated subcommittee composition just because she hasn't officially moved to the steering committee yet, but that she will only be on Just Transitions and then on the steering committee. I haven't asked about anybody else in that space. And Lauren, I see your comment in the chat. I can't remember how the process, and looking forward to updating the process roadmap and having clarity around all of that at some point in the coming months. But I do know that Just Transitions subcommittee members sit on multiple subcommittees. So like Kashka goes to science and data, and that was an intentional component of how Just Transitions would also interface with the work of other more substantive recommendation work from other subcommittees.
Okay. All right. So I'm not quite sure the right pathway for you all to make this decision. It feels like it's important that we get somebody on rural resilience and adaptation. It's important we have somebody on Just Transitions. And like at least cover those where we're desperately short, and then figure out a way to move on. So if Just Transitions, we know Just Transitions is a key place, and that's Paula's first choice. That seems like an obvious place to start, right?
Well, I have a question then. It seems like we're talking about two different things. One is need to have representation on each of the subcommittees. And the other is what is the most appropriate given the seat that they represent.
Yep.
And
It's
there's
a puzzle. Yeah.
Well, to me, I mean, we have over-representation on cross-sector, but I don't think it makes sense for the person who's sitting in the renewable energy programs to be anywhere else other than that. So I think it makes sense for Peter to be in cross-sector if that's where he wants to be, unless we need more representation in science and data. My perspective would be that the person who's supposed to represent rural communities should be in rural resilience, so it makes sense to me. And the only thing is municipalities, I would think that the most appropriate seat for them would be also rural resilience and adaptation. But if we're hurting for counselors and Just Transitions, that's kind of the one that seems up in the air to me, and which is more important, they fill the role or they fill the seat.
Got it. Okay, great. Jane?
Yeah, for time, I could put this in the chat, but just so folks remember, Chad Farrell sat on rural resilience and adaptation as the renewable energy seat. And, rural resilience does have a lot of actual components in the GWSA that speak to the scaling of cross-sector mitigation recommendations to municipalities and rural communities. And there's a lot about resilience and energy and other components. So this is not my job, so I'll just stick my foot in my mouth and just say, one, we could discuss with Peter just about representation and make sure he understands what is discussed at rural resilience. And I do think expertise from renewable energy programs was and could continue to be valuable on that subcommittee.
Okay. So why don't we make it, can I just suggest the pathway then, that we, based on that puzzle of how you fit the seat you occupy and where we need the most help in subcommittees, that these two sort of match up decently. And then the question mark here is Peter somehow being part of both of these. And maybe that's a conversation with Peter. Is that where you all are landing? Liz? New hand?
Yeah, I would, I guess the only kind of friendly amendment I'd make is I would suggest we go ahead, if we want to get them on subcommittees, go ahead and vote to give them all their first choice because they match for either the reasons of need or representation or both. and go talk to Peter about whether he is interested in a second committee or even switching, but at least that way he's assigned. And the reason I would do that is I recall what you're saying about Chad, and I recall some of the conversations in that subcommittee that would be really helpful to have Peter's voice in. I do agree with Lauren, who mentioned that I think it would be just from a fit point of view, important to have him on cross-sector, or at least offer that he can be on cross-sector, given that it was both his first choice and so obvious with his particular background. So I would prefer that we just agree to first choice because they make sense, with the please go, chat with Peter in particular about whether he's interested in more than one. Similarly, Paula, I mean, hearing what you said about Kelly, there might be some interest in having representation, liaison, but that depends on her level of interest.
Super. Okay. I saw thumbs up from Kristen and Lauren on that. So let's assume that the three of you liked what Liz put on the table. And is there anything else to say about that? I'll record that as what you agreed to. Okay. Kristen?
Oh, I just want to make sure that that last piece gets into with respect to Paula. I think likely because she's volunteered to be on the steering committee as well, correct? So 3 committees might be too much. But maybe she would prefer to serve on just transitions and rural resilience as opposed to just transitions and steering committee or something. I just want to make sure that Liz's last point about reaching out to both Peter and Paula
Got it.
makes it in. But otherwise, completely agree.
Okay. Vote for first choice. Talk to Peter about also paying attention and being involved in rural resilience. Talk to Paula about also being involved in rural resilience. Okay.
And what I'm hearing on that just is also that we should do that before the council meeting on Monday, because we want to make sure Paula is where she wants to be and understand that Liz is willing to come back to the steering committee if needed, or stay on the steering committee.
Yeah, that's totally fine. It all occurred to me when I looked back at what she said in her, and one of her, the last line was, and I hadn't been assigned yet. So that's it. Thanks, Jane.
Excellent. Okay. That's all we had on our agenda, except for some public comment. And thanks everyone for staying a few minutes later here. If you can, if folks who have been listening in to the conversation, I know that David's been here quietly the whole time while we're deciding his fate. Thank you, David, for being here. Others that have been listening in and have a public comment to make right now, this is a great time to do it. Let me just pause and see if anybody would like to. Pike, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I mentioned this last time. I'd like to reiterate it, given that it sounds like there's a biomass meeting scheduled for tomorrow. So it would be ideal if that was open to the public so we could see what's going on, given the controversy around biomass. And B, given that Green Mountain Power owns a stake in the McNeil generating plant, a financial interest in the McNeil generating plant, I think there's a clear conflict of interest for a GMP representative to be part of that discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, Pike. Okay. Noted. Any other comment? Okay. Any last things? Liz, go ahead, please.
Yeah, no, just in fairness, given the public comment, I just want to note that I didn't take part in the vote with regard to the biomass recommendations in the Climate Council, and had offered to sit in on the meetings coming up in order to provide some continuity for somebody who sat through all of the meetings that the task force went through. And, otherwise, hopefully those who sat with me on that task force recognize that we all worked in good faith together to bring those recommendations to the council. So I appreciate the point, but just wanted to make sure it was clear on the record that I purposefully did not participate in the votes. Thank you.
Thanks, Liz. I see a hand up from Annette. Annette, go ahead, please.
Yes, I'd like to comment on the the new committee appointments. I was trying to look at the existing representation, and I'm hearing the discussion about adding someone else to cross-sector, which already has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 counselors on it, while rural resilience has 1. And ag and ecosystems only has 3. So I didn't hear much about ag and ecosystems, and science and data only has 2. So I guess I'm going to really ask you to reconsider giving everyone their first choice. Cross-sector is already very heavy-handed in terms of counselors, and as you know, Chad Farrell did serve on rural resilience. It's an appropriate role for the renewable energy industry, and Abby Course has said it in an ag and ecosystem subcommittee meeting that she feels that committee is powerless. And the fact is that it is compared to cross-sector mitigation. And I think that you need to be aware of the dynamics and not add yet more counselors to, I mean, you're going to end up with only one subcommittee that's actually making decisions here. If it's the cross-sector mitigation subcommittee, the imbalance already exists. You have the opportunity to improve the makeup of these subcommittees. And I think it's a mistake to add yet one more counselor to that subcommittee, regardless of whether he wants to serve on another one. I think that you need to balance out these subcommittees and have, you know, you could have 3 or 4 on each one, but you've got so many on cross-sector mitigation, it's not looking like a fair makeup to me. So that's my comment. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, Annette. Thanks for the comment. Before we finish up, and first of all, I invite other comments if anybody else has a comment. Okay. Just an opportunity, steering committee members, if you want to react to anything we've been hearing in the comments, Annette's point or Pike's point, anything else that needs to be said, given all this. Okay. Okay, super. All right, well, thanks everybody for a short a last minute meeting like this. I appreciate everybody's input. We'll see you at the council meeting and everybody else at the council meeting on Monday. And have a great rest of your day. Take care, everybody.